Dear church, let's talk about churches without elders. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church Podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Thank you so much for tuning in. I've got my good friend Jake Sutton with us. Another Sutton. We had Stephen Sutton last week. We got Jake Sutton today. Both of y'all are dear friends of mine, but you're not related. I guess
No.
through Jesus we are, but you and Stephen are just buddies. You fight like brothers, but
Yeah.
but yeah. So, hey, Jake, thanks for joining us, man. I thank you so much for being here. Jake is coming out to us from Marietta, Georgia. The Piedmont Road Church of Christ is where he serves as the preaching minister. And Jake and I have been friends for a while, hunting buddies for a while. And he comes up here to West Texas and does some sandhill crane hunting and hog hunting and any kind of hunting we can get you into, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. If it's brown, it's down. You know how that is.
I do.
I love to hunt it all. You
Yep.
know, I'm not prejudiced one way or the other.
You're not picky about it.
No.
No, I appreciate you being on here too, because among your many talents, the biggest is your ability to preach the word. And I know that's what's drawn me to you. And we were talking about before we came on the air that this is your first time on the podcast, though, which is unfortunate. We need to have you on here more.
Oh yeah. I'm waiting on repentance and fruits of repentance.
Yeah, that's all my fault. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We'll
Listen,
correct
we're
that
both
going
wide
forward.
open, man.
We'll
It's
correct
good, though.
that
Good to
going
be
forward. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jake. And I wanted you to come on and talk about this because this is another funny side story. As I was contacting you about coming on the podcast, I didn't really have a topic. I just wanted to have you on because I love to highlight the good in the church, and you are one of the good things that's happening in the church, in the brotherhood. And so I contacted you. I just said, hey, I need to have you on. I don't know what we're going to talk about. Let's talk about something. And you mentioned some work that you've done on churches without elders. Now, your church does have elders, and mine does as well. But I am seeing this a lot in guys that preach that are sending me kind of questions and things to maybe to discuss on the podcast. One of the things that gets brought up a lot is, how to function at a church without elders. And I think it's something that I don't have a frame of reference for, but I know you do to some degree. And so I wanted to have you come on and talk about that. So just kind of set the stage for us, in this discussion.
Well, a lot of guys come out of preaching school. They might have come out of a seminary. They might have come out of a Bible college, and they're ready to get to it, and teach and preach the most soul-winningest lessons and sermons, and and they're ready to kiss the babies and name the boats, and just be on fire and just change the world and the church. And but before you know it, you're sitting there counseling a grieving spouse over some infidelity. You have a doctor's appointment that you've got to take Brother Sam to, and keep in mind you were up the previous night with your own sick child, and that's kind of what ministry looks like with churches that they're not unsound by any means. They're just they've not matured. They're without a solid biblical leadership. As much as we don't see a pastor system in our New Testament that's set up like most of the religious world, you're starting to see some of that, and you hate to see that, where there's a plague of men, of good, godly, spiritual leading men.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of issues as to why that is. There's a lot of good study material and psychology, and when did the pendulum begin to shift back to where we are today, and what happened? Where did the ball drop? Kind of thing. And so you see a plague in some folks, and thankfully I'm blessed. I'm nowhere near that. It's interesting. When I first came to Piedmont Road, I almost was like, okay, so what exactly are you paying me to do? They're hey, stay in your lane. We need you as pulpit minister. You're a cog in this wheel. This is a well-oiled machine. And like you at Oldham Lane, it's just you have a part to play. And that's what they expect out of you, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
It's weird to not wear so many different hats, but it's also a blessing. Not everybody has this blessing. Not everybody has this opportunity, and so my first work was without an eldership, and so I got to see it firsthand.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the gist of some stuff I've been working on. It's a book I'm looking to publish and put out probably at the end of this year. I'm fixing to take off the month of October. I got to preach 2 meetings, but I'm going to Montana, Idaho, and going to have a little bit of sabbatical.
Good.
And to wrap up a few things, and one of these is the book I've been on called Primus Pilus, which is Latin for first spear.
Yeah.
And that's in the Roman century. You had the centurion of every century, and he was called the first spear. He was the first man into war. And sometimes that's where we see a lot of the churches. Sometimes a church with elders still adhere to having the preacher as the main man. So this can be both churches with or without elderships. It's not prejudice to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that expectation versus reality because, I was that way. I'm sure, you were as well. And I think most of our guys coming out of preaching schools or out of universities, primed to preach, they come out, so on fire. And then you realize pretty quickly that there is an underbelly to the church. I mean, there are things there that in every church that are they're ugly. Where you have people, you have problems. There's things you got to deal with. Fellowship is messy, all those kind of things. And without a support system of elders, it becomes all hoisted on your shoulders. And so handling that can be very difficult. Let me ask you this, and this is kind of going off script a little bit, but when I was, my work before I came to Oldham Lane, there were some churches in the area that were very small, that didn't have elders, and they were clinging to keeping the doors open. I mean, a lot of times you find out, look, great granddaddy built this building and we don't want to turn loose of it. There's a lot of sentimental value, and I don't mean to disparage that because I mean that does mean something, but there's other reasons why people just hang on and hang on. There was probably no way that elders were ever going to be raised up in this church, and they were all about 5 miles apart from the church that I was at, which was, a church that was led by elders. When is the point where you just say, look, this is not scripturally functional anymore, and it's time to close the doors, and it's time to, because I made one of those churches, I think, a little angry at me because I said that. I mean, y'all have existed for 40 years without elders. You're dwindling where you sit. We're 8 miles down the road. Come on. There's another church 5 miles down the road, and another one's 3 miles down the road. Why don't you go to one of those where you can be under the oversight of elders? It's time to cut your losses. When is that time?
That's a great question. I had an instructor in school, and he told us, he said, the Lord purposefully lost the ark because if we had it, we would worship it. I've been in some churches, man, preaching in country churches, and I don't know why this is, but I've been in some visiting churches and whatnot, and you see these gold plates at the end of these pews that's been, hey, this is so-and-so's pew. Down every pew, this is dedicated to so many different people. And I've even seen one on the Lord's Supper table with someone else's name on it. And I thought, okay, wait a minute. Whose house is this?
Right.
Man, that's such a temporal plague. That's such a here and now. That's such a... Those issues are probably a lot deeper, a lot more spiritual than maybe we have time to address. But you have folks that will cling to this physical world, and when they sing "This world is not my home," they don't really mean it, because they hold on to physical structures. And it's the same thing that when you see a funeral take place, and the house and the possessions are about to be split up. That's when people's fangs come out.
Oh yeah.
I mean, other than just maybe pride or maybe just I don't want to say greed, but just a sense of maybe the word is covet. A sense of possessionalism is just at the root of that. I don't know. That's probably for every person. Much like, am I the man for this job? When should a preacher leave a local work? Well, you want to leave when things are great. But it doesn't always go that way. It's usually the case where it's the opposite, where you're forced to leave, you're asked to leave, you're fired, or they, I've got friends who are in local works in what we would consider to be healthy, sound churches, but there's nothing sound about the eldership and the way that they're pushing out the preachers, and it's underhanded stuff, and just it's just sad. But much like with an eldership or lack of eldership, it's up to every individual. At what point do I leave? The first question I want to ask if I'm considering leaving a work, okay, is this a hill that I want to die on?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, is it unscriptural? Okay, if it's unscriptural, then yeah, labor with them, work with them as long as you can. But there comes a point in time when you've got to move on. It's like how long do you preach the gospel to people who do not hear? How much energy do you waste on people who aren't receptive? Jesus, very much the case. He said, hey, dust off your cloaks and your feet, move on to the next town.
Yep.
That's hard, but that's much like John 6 when he had that huge crowd of people. You'd think, hey, great, numbers are up.
Yeah.
But he began to use trigger words that was like cannibalism.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, you don't have no part of me. Well, to a Jew, they thinking, hey, this guy is out of his mind using those kind of words. So he purposefully did those things that he knew. Of course, he knew hearts. But is this situation hurting my relationship with my Lord? For me personally, and well, if it's no, then is this congregation and is this work hurting my relationship, my wife's relationship with the Lord, or our relationship together, or my children's relationship? So as a preacher, your priority number one is your soul, the second is your wife, and the third is your children, and then the fourth would be the church. If we ever get that out of order, we've really messed up. God, me, my spouse, children, and then the church. You see folks that kind of get that out of whack sometimes, and it's never good. It doesn't end well.
No, I agree. And that's really, I know I asked you a question that's really hard to answer. And I asked it because I've had a tough time answering it as well. Because there are real reasons why a church keeps its doors open, even though it doesn't have elders. There's also some reasons why they should close. And it depends on the context. It depends on the congregation. It kind of depends on where it's at. There are friends of mine that worship in places in the United States and in the world where, they're still trying to get to the point where they can have elders and stuff, but there's not a church on every corner. If it wasn't for them, there wouldn't be one and a church. So they're dealing with that as well. Talk about this a little bit. How do we remedy this problem? We know there's a problem, of not having strong, sound men to lead in a congregation. How do we remedy that? What can we do?
Well, practically, there's a lot of great ministry that's out there, a lot of great ways to serve and to raise up. But kind of going back to the book a little bit, some things that I'm working with is that a centurion he would take these 80 men. There were, we think of a century being 100 men, but it was 80 men. And it was made up of what they called a contubernium. It was a group of 8 guys.
Right.
And these 8 guys would do everything together. They slept together. They were eating together. They cleaned latrines. And you had, the new guys, the boots, the rookies, they're gonna clean the latrine. They're gonna stone bust. They're gonna do mason work. They're gonna do the huntsman job. And then slowly after time, they begin to graduate. So it's very much that biblical principle, to the one that has, more will be given. Of course, that was in the context of knowledge. But you have a pattern, a healthy pattern. I know Stephen addressed church culture and did a lot of great things, last week. But that's kind of a gist, is where you begin to compile men of that 2 Timothy 2 passage, that 2:2, gather up these guys that are healthy, that are able to continue the work. And you gather up these guys and you put them in a group together. You begin to work together. And it starts small. Anything that's ever been great and faithful and on a large scale always begins small. Think about the early church. We started with just one seed, which is the Word of God, and here we are today, Yeah. And one of the things that we do here at Piedmont Road and a lot of other places is a ministry called Men of Valor. And it's not your usual come together on Saturday and Brother Bill leads us in a study of Isaiah.
Yeah.
It's a time where it began with just 6 of us that we knew we could rely on one another, trust one another, could be transparent with one another, because that's a real issue. What you have we live in a time where it's not okay to be a man. It's not okay to say things that you need to say. There's no physical release for you. And you see guys, I was talking with one of our members last night, and he was saying that there was a dear brother at the church who was just so faithful and great, and they had a funeral and a remembrance of him that was put on by his friends, and they had it at a winery. And this man was a Scotch lover, and he loved all sorts of drink and all sorts of alcohol, and it really just took the church back because they never knew this side of this guy.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is we're just not willing to be transparent. We're not willing to talk about certain issues. We, as men, they say that you have less than 3 friends that you can actually go to and talk to and be open with. And so what happens is men finally just fold.
Yeah.
You can only go so long, and then you're just going to collapse.
Right.
You'll run out on your spouse. You'll abuse people. You'll become a workaholic. You'll do all sorts of things. And so this is kind of a ministry, men of valor, that will bring that back together to say, hey, there's a few of us, and we'd like to talk about some things. But if you're not willing to listen and hear some of our struggles and pray with us, then this isn't a group for you, And
Yeah.
so what we did was, the 6 of us, is we would go find one person who we thought, okay, this one seems to be trustworthy. And so, and you're slowly beginning to build that. Now, this can happen with elders or without elders. It doesn't matter. And of course, our eldership knows about it, but this is not something that's publicized at the church.
Yeah.
This isn't something that's just everybody knows that, hey, these guys are meeting once, twice a month. This isn't known like that. But it's building this silver thread.
Yeah.
And raising up the next generation. And much like the Primus Pilus, he had to take Caesar's men from where they were and raise them up to where they needed to be. And so being practical, being hands-on, you know how it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes an eldership will have an issue, and they'll say, hey, we need a sermon on such and such.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, what they need is a shepherd to get out in the trenches with them and look at them in the eye and talk with them.
Yeah.
That's what they really need. It's like if somebody in the church is guilty of a sin, we say, I'll get up here and preach a sermon and just whip that person in front of the whole church. That's so backwards.
I agree.
We need elders that are willing to get dirty, and we need men who are willing to get dirty, get in the trenches and take time and build these guys up. And yes, it's slow, but is it worth it? Oh yeah.
No
You're
doubt.
shifting the tide, shifting the church culture. And it's making a huge difference. In 5 years, the church will look completely different than it did when you first got there.
I totally agree. I love that. And I would say this as a sidebar too, is I've run into a lot of guys. Well, I'll give an example. One of these churches that I mentioned a moment ago, and when we mention churches, we always say in a galaxy far, far away, right? So nobody thinks that it's in your town. This was way far away in another place. But this church had men who were qualified. Men that could be elders, but they wouldn't step up. And one of the things that I heard, and I hear this a lot from gentlemen, is, well, I don't desire the office. And if I don't desire the office, then, I shouldn't be an elder. Well, I would turn that around and say, a lot of your leaders, especially in the Old Testament, didn't desire the office. Moses didn't. Gideon didn't. I could go through a litany of people who didn't desire the leadership that God was thrusting upon them. And so I don't think that is a valid excuse when you are a man who has the ability, that meets the qualifications, and can really bring a lot to the table. For you to discredit that or discount that by saying, well, I don't desire the office. Well, come around to desiring the office because we need you. What would you say to that?
Yeah, probably if a person doesn't desire the office, they're not as qualified as we'd like for them to be.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there's no such thing as a perfect elder. I mean, elders are made, and they continue to grow. I'm blessed to be at a place where elders have confided to me and say, hey, I was not a compassionate person when I walked into this room.
Yeah.
But over time, I've learned that, hey, it's not always black and white. We live in the gray with a lot of the work, and that causes me to be sympathetic to people and empathetic. That's made me a great Christian because I now serve as an elder. So it transforms them.
Yes.
Stepping into that role. I've often heard it say that it's not a qualification, but it's a clarification. It's one of those things where we want them to desire the work, but we don't want them to. So it's kind of a paradox,
Yeah.
We don't want them gun hungry for the sake of power or something like that, but you want them to be able to do it. And chances are, when it comes to serving as an elder, a lot of it's just fear of the unknown. A lot of it's just, what is this going to mean? And I'll be honest, I mean, you've served in the pulpit, you've preached. There's things about your work that you don't like to address and like to deal with. But it's just the nature of the beast. It's such it is with just being a Christian in general. And probably if there's a person who struggles with, hey, I don't desire that, I would sit down and say, okay, what is it that you actually don't desire? And I've had these conversations with a person who said that, and they said, well, I'm just afraid of being the bad guy. Okay, well, do you realize that you're going to be in a room full of other men, and it's not going to be your decision, it's going to be the eldership's decision.
Right.
Some would say, well, I don't know that if my wife is ready. Well, let's talk with your wife. Let's see how she feels. Don't just ask the man if he's willing, because it takes them both. I mean, the gospel comes with a house key, and especially as an elder and a shepherd.
Yeah, no doubt.
Hospitality is so much more than just having people in your home. It's really just how you make them feel. How does a person feel when they're around you? So, it is true. I know of preachers who say, hey, fellas, that they go into these self-appointed elders meetings called men's meetings,
Oh, yeah.
The business meetings, and you talk church business. And I've heard folks say that I walked into the room and say, fellas, I'm drowning. As the preacher, I have no help, and I'm drowning, and I need help. And either they give help or they don't. And the fellows who usually don't receive that help, they just have to leave.
Yeah,
because they're exhausted. And so I heard Cliff Goodwin say this one time. He said, if there's a man who can stand before Jesus Christ at the end of his life, and he said, I was a faithful Christian, but I didn't desire to help other people go to heaven. He said, what do you think Jesus is going to say to that? Mm-hmm. So that it really takes a step back. If a person desires it, and if they don't desire it, it tells you a lot about their heart. And it could just be fear. But it behooves us as pulpit guys, not necessarily some evangelistic authority issue, but to say, hey, a preacher needs to come in and build this church up through the preaching and the exposition of the word, and grow this congregation and develop it in relationships. And a lot of times, these guys just feel like they're on their own, or they're overwhelmed, and they don't need something else on their plate. And as much as they love the church, they're exhausted.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I like what you said there about we want them to desire it, but then we don't. Some churches go through the elder appointment process, and they'll ask the congregation for names. And, when a man puts down his own name, you're kind of like, oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, there's that, right? So, that was a good punctuation point on what I said. I appreciate that. So, talk about this. You mentioned it already, but I want you to elaborate. You mentioned staying committed to the little things. And that little things become big things. And I agree with that totally. When I was a coach, I made sure that when we ran line drills, you reached down, you touched that line with your hand. If you got this close to it and didn't touch it, we kept running, because you're going to, the little things. We made sure the dressing room was always cleaned up. If there was a sock left out, you ran for that. And the kids at the beginning were like, this guy's a slave driver. What is this? What is he doing here to us? But they came to understand that the little things, the details, is where it's at. And that's where you build something big, is by taking care of the details.
Yeah, I think it's when we're given a list of things of how a person is to be, and in fact, when you came here in the summer and spoke, you didn't go to the usual typical passages about of the qualifications of an elder. Mm-hmm. You went to the realities of a Christian, and the tendencies that who we are to be. So as somebody who, even though I was raised in the church, I saw hypocrisy, or I saw, people disregarding things and all of those things. That just comes along with it. If it's the case, probably, well, let me put it this way. When we're talking about the little things, realistically, it's the heart of the matter. As a pulpit preacher, I don't have to get up on Sundays and preach Hebrews 10:25. And I don't have to preach on this sin or this sin or this sin or this sin. If a person has really given their heart to the Lord, you don't have to worry about giving them grease around the wheel all the time.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the little things, is your heart in it? Are you really sold on this Jesus thing? Because if you are, then the little things will take care of themselves. And it is. You can't have, as somebody who played high school ball and played college ball and then coached high school ball, if things were not tended to on a regular basis because you love to tend to them, then it becomes, like you said, a taskmaster.
Yeah.
It becomes burdensome. It becomes that preacher's after me again. It's the elders are after me again, or whatever it is. It has to be. If he's not our utmost joy, God, Jesus, his work, then the little things are going to be overlooked. We're going to cut corners. We're going to skim here. We're going to do that. And as you mentioned, I almost kind of got a little sick when you were talking about sprinting. And I remember those days. I mean, the coach will blow the whistle and everybody on the line. Here we go.
Yep.
You know. And,
yep.
But if guys are sold, you don't have to sell them.
Yeah.
You don't have to sell them. If they're sold, you don't have to sell them. It's the other folks that you kind of have to call a little bit and bring about and pray God would destroy their little g gods that's in their life that's keeping them from doing the small things.
Yeah.
You know, if you love your wife, the small things come naturally. If you love your children, small things come naturally. It's the same thing with the Lord.
Yeah.
You know, that's just where it is, I think.
So you're not starting with the details. You're starting with the overall big picture, which is your dedication to discipleship and loving the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah. So, you know, if the greatest problem that I ever could have, which is my sin, is resolved, that should take the relief off of me. That should take that should make all the little things just to be a blessing, not a burden.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Man, Jake, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a great discussion. Appreciate our friendship. Appreciate the work that you're doing there at Piedmont Road. I want to plug the things that you're doing. So we've got a book coming out, hopefully, here at the end of the year. Tell us what else, what else is going on.
So obviously the book at the end of the year, and that goes through Joe Wells, Kyle Publications.
Yep.
Something that we did during COVID. I have a little boy, 6 years old, Stone. And it was fun. We developed this little green monster named Petey, and Petey and pals and Joe and myself and Jeremy Pate have put this thing out there. And so Petey and pals is out there. It's kind of a children's book, and it teaches fundamentals of Christian faith, through this little green puppet and all of his little pals, and working on a next couple of different things with him. So that's going to be fun. Of course, I want to mention this. I know you're in Texas, and but if somebody's watching this and they're going to be near the Chattanooga area, there is a Facebook page called Edify for the Servant. I do a podcast, and it's for preachers and elders and deacons. But we're doing a sermon planning, mental and physical health retreat. It's just a 24-hour shot, but it's going to be very intentional, not a lot of fluff. It's going to be practical tools and things to help you and give you to, plan your sermons year round.
Yeah.
If you're in pulpit ministry, because that's a huge burden. Sunday comes every week, and if it's already taken care of, man, talk about you got time for other things.
Yeah.
But mental health is also big. Dr. Neil Ritchie from Freed Hardeman preaches over in Roanoke, Virginia. He's going to come and give some tools, coping skills and things, and talk about isolation and things that preachers often worry with, and there's going to be a segment there about physical health and take care of your physical body and those little things you're talking about.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's October 28th and 29th of this year, and you can go to Edify. The link is on there on Facebook, and
that's great.
So,
I like that idea.
I want to help folks.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's going to be great. And of course, I would tell our viewers and listeners, if you're ever in the Atlanta, Georgia area, you're at Marietta, Piedmont Road Church of Christ, stop in. A wonderful congregation, loving people. Jake does an excellent job from the pulpit. And I also want to say that if you have questions about today's podcast, you can email me, chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. Or if you have a question for Jake, we can make sure that he gets that question. We'll email it on to him. And we're so thankful that you're here today, Jake, and we wish you well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate the opportunity, and let's keep chugging along, keep chopping.
That's all we can do. And thank you guys for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.